Hey kids, time for some good old wrestling opinions, and of course, nobody likes hearing mine, for obvious reasons. So, we have the argument that the Orton and Cena feud from a majority of the late 2010s to 2000s to 2010s was an overrated schlockfest. I hated it. Every time they treated this like this was the next Austin and Rock rivalry, they have had pay-per-view main event after pay-per-view main event over the minuscule draws, and those weren't even the biggest parts of like 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009. That was like a huge hoax of their feud. Then it fizzled around until like 2013 when the Authority storyline was building over until like TLC where they had to unify the titles. They even had a match over in like 2014 Raw. I don't know, Royal Rumble was like their last title match against each other. So that's the most we have like accumulated over like at least 15 matches, double-digit matches over pay-per-views, and none of them were ever a Mania main event because they never drew to the extent that they could. Like around at least a couple, 200,000 or 300,000, ever extendifying like their main event matches they had at like SummerSlam 07, Bragging Rights, Breaking Point, Hell in a Cell. Like all these pay-per-view matches, and none of them were like the minuscule reason why people would buy this stupid pay-per-view. I hated every match. Every Orton and Cena match was the same thing. Finisher, break off finisher. But the majority of them barely had any storyline other than back in like 07, where it's like, okay, Orton's a sadistic dickhead psychopath and he's trying to punt the shit out of Cena's dad. So that's the extent over the storyline. Kind of regurgitated how it was for the Edge and Cena storyline, except Edge was actually built over being a main event star with John Cena. This is the polar opposite. Thinks Orton's already a significant name around the main event scene around that time. And they just kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it and pushing and pushing and pushing. And now nobody... I don't think any people remember Alive and Kicking, either than if you own, like, I guess, SmackDown vs. Raw 2007, but that's besides the point. Just saying, to the extent of people understanding that this feud sucked, this feud was overly dragged, as many, like, 15-minute promo segments they push around each other on Raw, to the back and forth WrestleMania-esque kickouts out of their own finishers. Like, I swear to God, 2014 Royal Rumble was like one of their weaker matches. Next to like SummerSlam 2009, where like false finish after false finish, had to reverse it. After a DQ, Cena wins it back, and then Orton wins it back over just a roll up. And then there was the Bragging Rights match. That was their best match out of like 5 years. These guys just... the bare minuscule over chemistry. It just feels like they were going for the motions just so they could try to get a big pop over most of their matches. Using their own finishers, trying to involve their own personal feuds. It just felt so inorganic, even though it felt like WWE been trying to push this for the rivalry of their generation. We know the Ruthless Aggression era, the two young upstarts from OVW becoming top-of-the-line main event stars. I understand that what they were pushing around that time, but people were more ecstatic for Batista and John Cena than they are... and plus they had better matches. Of course, people know the SummerSlam 2008 main event where Batista, kayfabe-wise, broke John Cena's neck. I think he got hurt like by Mr. Kennedy, and then he was out again to push another film, and Cena was out until like, Survivor Series that same year, after he just got hurt again, just the year prior, coming back like Royal Rumble, after he was supposed to be out until like, I guess like until Backlash or something. So that's the extent, because Cena has gotten multiple feuds, and sure, some crashed and burned, some were good, like Edge, his feuds with Edge, not Undertaker. It's either Edge, JBL, or Batista. Those are his best rivalries. Orton is one of his weaker ones because they were highly repetitive, barely had the extent of a storyline to keep it overarching, and it had no draw factor. It had no extent of excitement. Like, oh, I want to see Orton and Cena get on Raw, even though they're going to wrestle on pay-per-view, and then it's back over to the same promo because they basically have no conflicting words to ever feel appealing because Orton never has like a way to like back up with his words over in a feud, and it's never emotionally tying whenever they wrestle, other than that time Orton kicked his dad in the face. But everybody back in the day beat John Cena's dad's ass so they can get a storyline out of him. But Edge actually made it over to work because he was actually a drawing up and coming star. So that's something that Orton never even had the glimpse to do, even though how much they were overly pushing him to be in main event scenes, be in main event feuds. I just never, in my opinion, thought that Orton was a very good, confidential, like, main eventer. That's my opinion on the matter. I understand people want to be like, Orton's goated. Orton, he looks like a WWE star. He wrestles like one. He always has great matches. He's consistent. He barely gets injured. He always is like one of the faces of a company. Look, he's only over for his finishing move and his 5-minute entrance. That's it. Sure, he looks good. He looks like a movie star. He can talk. He's a good hand to have, but he's just every time, he's just never been a residual draw. Even his feud with Brock Lesnar got much out of me, other than we know that we're just going to see him for the RKO. Not much of a conflict of interest comes out of Brock Lesnar and Randy Orton, even though it should. But the most people could remember from that time was Orton got fucking his ass munched on SummerSlam that same year and bled nearly to death, that it got Chris Jericho to try to grow a pair, and then he sort of fought. People thinking that he beat Goldberg. You gotta be kidding me. What? How did he beat Goldberg? A gun? But that's besides the point. That's just my opinion over in the matter. I always hated this feud back in the day, and this is from a guy that grown up on Ruthless Aggression era, and I've enjoyed a lot of feuds. Kurt Angle against Chris Benoit, Kurt Angle against Brock Lesnar, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Batista, Cena, Batista, Rey Mysterio. There's a buttload of feuds to remember in those times in the 2000s to at least a bit of the 2010s, but I just felt like Cena and Orton was overdone. It never felt authentic every time they wrestled, and Orton just was not much to back up over Cena, even though like Cena was the bigger star out of all of it, and all their matches were like forgettable until they like push over their finisher, and nobody remembers much of their matches until like the bragging rights one. So that's the extent of what I push over for the Cena and Orton feud. It's overrated. If you guys think differently, comment down in the comment section below. I'd like to hear your opinion. If you want, you can also tell me what were your favorite wrestling feuds other than that I just discussed. That's it for me. Thanks for watching.